John Martin Scripps got his love for traveling from his father, as the pair went everywhere together. But after his father committed suicide when he was 9, John never really got over it, with his grades slipping to the point where he dropped out of school at just 15 years old. He then resorted to a life of crime, getting arrested for theft and drug possession as a way to earn money. When he was caught, he would go on home release, abscond the terms, then be arrested shortly afterward. After his most recent jail stint, he came up with a new way of earning money, a much more evil way. Welcome to History's Biggest Villains. John was born on December 9th, 1959 in Letchford, Hertfordshire, to Leonard and Jean Scripps, a lorry driver and a barmaid respectively. John traveled with his dad often, as the two were very close. However, Leonard committed suicide when John was 9. This obviously affected him, as he dealt with severe dyslexia, dropping out of school by age 15. He still enjoyed traveling, so he found odd jobs and sold antiques to raise money for his adventures. Without a consistent means of income, John developed sticky fingers, as in May 1974, the 14-year-old was caught stealing, being sentenced to 12 months conditional discharge and a £10 fine. His initial capture didn't stop him, as by August 1976, he had been arrested 3 times for burglary and assault. He received his first adult charge in 1978, being booked for indecent assault. By 1980, he made his way to Mexico, marrying Maria Arellano's. They traveled together for 2 years until John was sentenced to a 3-year term for theft, burglary, and resisting arrest. Of course, Maria was upset that her husband was locked up, but it was made even worse when John escaped during home leave in June 1985, just months before he was scheduled to be released, reverting back to his drug smuggling ways. After being recaptured and sentenced to another 3 years in prison, Maria filed for divorce. She then married Ken Cold, a constable of the Royal Protection Squad. John was so upset with this that when he was on home leave again, he stole some of Ken's clothes. He then began to harass Maria, only being appeased when she divorced him and moved back to her hometown. After this, he legally changed his name to just John Martin. He traveled through Europe and Asia, trafficking drugs for a heroin syndicate. In 1987, he was stopped by TSA agents at the Heathrow Airport on suspicion of drug possession. They found a key on his person that unlocked a safe deposit box located at a bank in Singapore. Their narcotics department seized 1.5 kilos of heroin, worth about $1 million on the street. For this offense, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. John escaped while on home leave again and was later recaptured, as an additional 6 years was added onto his sentence. While incarcerated at HMP Albany in 1992, he became a model prisoner. He started with menial jobs like dishwashing and general cleaning, later being promoted to the butcher position. He was trained under James Quigley, the prison caterer, and another inmate only identified as Ginger. He was taught how to dismember and debone the animals after slaughtering them. He performed this job so well that he even told Quigley that he wanted to open a butcher shop after his release. In August 1993, John was transferred to HMP Hempstead as a result of his security level change. He was denied parole initially, but 2 days later, he was granted home leave, and say it with me, he escaped. His mother noticed that he was selling all of his possessions to other inmates, which is a usual indication of plans to escape, and she pleaded with prison authorities not to release him. But when John arrived home this time, she gave him £200 for travel expenses. John used the birth certificate of another inmate to get a passport, assuming the name Simon James Davis. A month later, he returned to Mexico, using his given name John Martin. He went to the British embassy there and made up a story about losing his passport in order to get another one. On March 8, 1995, at 2 a.m., his flight from San Francisco touched down in Singapore. John had come up with a new plan on how to make money. He knew that there were tourists from other countries visiting Singapore, and they usually had a lot of cash on them. He went to the store and grabbed the necessary tools to carry out this endeavor. Gerard Lowe was visiting from Johannesburg, South Africa, working as a chemical engineer with South African breweries. He came to Singapore specifically for electronic goods. Before he left on the 7th, he gave his wife Vanessa his exact schedule, with a message that read, "I will call you the moment I check into the hotel to give you the contact number. If you don't hear from me on March 10th, it would mean that I have a seat on the plane to return to South Africa and will arrive home on March 11th. But if I do call you on March 10th, that would mean that I haven't gotten a seat and will return on March 12th. When Gerard arrived at the Changi airport on the morning of March 8th, Simon Davis, or John Martin, approached him and struck up a conversation, suggesting that they share a room. Gerard agreed to this and they booked room 1511 at the Riverview Hotel off Havelock Road. When the two men got back to the room, John pulled out a taser and shocked Gerard, leaving him paralyzed. He then grabbed a hammer and struck him multiple times in the head. John then dismembered the body in the bathroom and placed the parts in several plastic bags, eventually tossing them in the river. The next morning, John asked the receptionist to delete Gerard's name off the register, saying that he kicked him out for being gay, which was illegal in Singapore at the time. Later that day, He forged Gerard's signature, using his credit card to withdraw $6,000 from a bank at the Raphael City shopping center. He took out a further $2,400 over the next 2 days using the same technique. John spent $490 on a video recorder that he mailed to his sister in England, $180 on a pair of Nike Air Max shoes, along with a ticket to the Singapore Symphony Orchestra. On March 11th, he went to a travel agency to transfer $8,500 in cash, along with another $5,000 in converted traveler's checks to an account based in San Francisco under the name John Martin. He was told that the transfer would take a few days, so he spent $485 on a plane ticket to Bangkok as he left the airport at 7 o'clock that same night. On the 13th, a pair of legs severed at the knees were found in a plastic bag floating off Clifford Pier. 3 days later, a pair of thighs and a torso was found in the same location, also in a plastic bag. Initially, the police could only determine that the body parts were from a white male, but they also had a possible name, as Vanessa Lowe had reported her husband missing since he failed to contact his family like he promised. Gerard's co-workers also tried to determine his whereabouts through personal contacts in Singapore. The authorities chose not to immediately inform the media about the discovery, as they didn't want to alert the suspect, possibly dissuading him from returning to the country if he had already fled. Vanessa identified her husband's body parts on April 1st, and then it was on to the forensic pathologist, Chao Zi Chang. Since the head and arms were never found, he couldn't determine the cause of death, but the way the body was dismembered led him to believe that the perpetrator was either a doctor, medical surgeon, or a butcher. Chao firmly told the police, "Look, you're dealing with a serial killer." Sheila Demude and her son Darren were visiting Bangkok from British Columbia on March 16th. She was a high school administrator while Darren was a college student. They were in Thailand on holiday, encountering John as he sat in the same row as them on the plane. He quickly befriended the mother and son, as they all checked into the Nilly's Marina Inn. John was assigned room 48, and the Demudes received the adjacent room 43. After they ate breakfast the next morning, the Demudes were never seen again. After 11 a.m., John asked the receptionist to switch his room 43, telling her that the Demudes left and he would cover the bill. He checked out and boarded a plane to Singapore that arrived on the 19th. That same day, 2 human skulls were found in an unused tin mine in the Katu district. 5 days later, a torso and a pair of arms and legs were found along Ban Nai Train Road just 6 miles away. The advanced state of decomposition left visual identification impossible, so the police used dental records to determine that the skulls belonged to Sheila and Darren Demude. Forensic analysis concluded that the torso, arms, and legs belonged to Sheila. The other parts of Darren's body were never found. John was oblivious to the fact that Gerard's remains were already discovered, as he was focused on completing the money transfer he arranged a couple days ago. He arrived at the airport and produced a passport with the name Simon Davis. However, this name was on the wanted list after police determined that Gerard was checked into the Riverview Hotel by someone with that name. He was promptly arrested. In the police interrogation room at the airport, he smashed a glass panel and tried to cut his wrist in a suicide attempt, as he feared he would meet the same fate as Flor Complantacion, a Filipino woman who had a date with a rope 2 days before after being charged with 2 murders. Police stopped him just in time, taking him to the hospital to get treated for a small cut. On his person, he had 6 passports, one with his name, 2 British passports issued to Simon Davis, 2 Canadian passports issued to Sheila and Darren Demude, and a South African passport issued to Gerard Lowe, as each of these had John's photos glued over the original. They also found $40,000 in cash, along with Sheila and Gerard's credit cards. They then found Simon Davis's birth certificate, a 3-pound hammer, a battery-operated Z-Force taser, a can of mace, 2 pairs of handcuffs, a pair of thumb cuffs, 4 knives, a sharpening stone, and 24 cannabis joints. On March 21st, 1995, he was charged under the name Simon Davis for forging Gerard's signature on a credit card transaction slip. He was then charged under his real name for the murder of Gerard, also picking up charges of forgery, vandalism, possession of an offensive weapon, and drug possession. John's trial for the murder of Gerard Lowe began on October 2nd, 1995 in the High Court of Singapore. Before the trial, John made a statement explaining that he had killed Gerard in self-defense. He said he had fallen asleep after checking in, but woke up after someone touched his butt. It was Gerard, who was clad only in his underwear and smiling at him. To him, this behavior made him appear to be a homosexual, so John kicked him away. This angered Gerard, who threw the hammer at his stomach. John then grabbed the hammer and hit him several times over the head until he collapsed onto the carpeted floor. He then fled in a taxi to the Sentosa Hotel of a British friend and confessed to accidentally killing Lowe. Martin spent the night in Sentosa while his friend traveled to the Riverview Hotel and disposed of his body by throwing it in the Singapore River. He continued, "I am not sure of the next thing I did. Everything was such a blur to me after this incident that I was walking around in a dream world for the next few days." When questioned, John couldn't identify this friend, saying, "I can't tell you who he is because if he knew, he would harm my family back in Britain." John claimed that this friend was a drug trafficker in his 40s and that he previously worked with him in the late 80s. On March 15th, he fled to Phuket, where he met his friend again, who gave him the passports and other items belonging to the Demudes, whom he never met. In court, John argued that he wasn't a violent person. I may have worked in the prison butchery, but cutting up a human body is another thing. When I saw the photographs, it made me feel sick. He maintained that he killed Lowe after he made sexual advances that caused him to freak out. When the prosecutors asked him what he did after killing Lowe, he said that he couldn't remember anything because he had drunk excessively and consumed Valium at the time of the murder. He swore that he didn't kill the Demudes and that he had come back to Singapore to clear his conscience about Lowe's death. The prosecution cast doubt on his claims of not being able to remember things clearly, pointing out the extremely neat and detailed replicas on the memo pad he used in Phuket to practice forging the Demuse signatures. Prosecutor Jennifer Marie didn't believe John's story about some British friend either. She provided evidence of his signature on a Riverview Hotel restaurant bill on the night of March 8th, the same night he was supposedly with his friend. John claimed that he tried to call his friend at two different Sentosa hotels, the Beaufort and the Shangri-La Rasa Resort, but was informed that his friend was no longer at either of them. John's itemized bill confirmed that he did ring both hotels on March 10th. John added that his friend called him later that night to let him know that he had taken to another hotel. This was in the Marina Center, but he couldn't remember which hotel it was, whether it was the Marina Mandarin, the Oriental, or the Pan Pacific. After this new information came out, Assistant Superintendent Gerald Lim and his team went to all 5 hotels to get the names of all single male guests who checked in or out on March 10th. They compiled a list of 150 men who checked out of the Beaufort or the Shangri-La Rasa Hotel on the day in question. This was then cross-checked against the names of those who checked into the 3 Marina Center hotels. He testified that none of these names appeared on the check-in register of any of the hotels. 2 hotel chambermaids described a strange smell in room 1511 when they made up the room between March 9th and March 11th, along with a statement from a hotel security guard saying he saw John leaving the hotel with a large suitcase early in the morning on March 11th, then returning without it 15 minutes later. These statements were used by the prosecution to imply that Gerard's body was stored in the room for a number of days, then was disposed of by John himself. The prosecution also provided evidence to support robbery as a motive instead of self-defense. Receipts from a shopping spree using Lowe's credit card was also cited as evidence of premeditation in a rebuttal to the statement of walking around in a dream world after the murder. John shot himself in the foot, testifying earlier that he had previously taken photocopies of other people's passports with his own photo attached so he could cash their traveler's checks, which further proved the financial motive. Jennifer also highlighted similar fact evidence between the deaths of the Demudes and Gerard. Jennifer also explained how both murders had a similar modus operandi, which involved John getting to know the victim, getting in the same room or one close to them, killing them, dismembering them, stealing their money, and then pasting his photo over their original passport photos. In Singapore, there hadn't been jury trials since 1969, so it was essentially a bench trial. On November 7, 1995, the judge adjourned for 3 days to consider his verdict. When the trial resumed, he was satisfied that the prosecution had made its case and dismissed John's version of events. He found him guilty and sentenced him to death. In his verdict, Justice T.S. Sinathari said, "I'm satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that Martin had intentionally killed Lowe. After that, he disarticulated Lowe's body into separate parts, and it was he who subsequently disposed of the body parts by throwing them into the river behind the hotel. On the evidence, I had no difficulty to find that it was Martin who was concerned with the deaths of Sheila and Darren and for the disposal of their body parts found at different sites in Phuket. The disarticulation of the body parts of Lowe, Sheila, and Darren have the hallmark signs of having been done by the same person. Altogether, this similar evidence reinforces the decision I have made, for it puts beyond doubt that Martin is guilty on the charge of murder. The sentence of this court upon you is that you will be taken from this place to a lawful prison, and taken to a place to be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and may the Lord have mercy on your soul." 8 days later, John announced that he would appeal against the sentence. He dropped the appeal with no explanation on January 4, 1996, 4 days before it was supposed to be heard. In the days before his hanging, John lamented that no one loved him besides his family and his ex-wife Maria, writing a series of misspelled notes as he was semi-literate. "One day poor, one day reach. Money fills the pain of hunger, but what will fill the emptiness inside? I know that love is beyond me, so do I give myself to God, the God that has betrayed me? Can I be a person again? Only time will tell me. You may take my life for what it is worth, but grant thou that I love peace and happiness." He complained that in prison, you were told every day that you were not a member of the human race. The day before he was set to be hanged, he dreamed that he had avoided his sentence by committing suicide, saying, "I tied the rope around my little neck before I got up on the old creaky chair. I reached down and picked up a handful of earth and put it in my mouth. Then I crawled up to the old creaky chair and pulled the rope tighter and tighter still. I was on tiptoe. Just one more pull. Then my feet left the chair, knocking it over, and darkness embraced me as the heavens opened. I woke up in darkness and felt a heavy weight on my chest. I cried out, 'Mummy, I'm here.'" John's mother remarked, "Whoever he is now, he's the person the prison service trained him to be. Those bastards have no right to take my son's life. I brought him into the world. I'm the only person that can take him out of it." However, no one formally protested against the hanging. The British government chose not to get involved, declining to submit a plea for clemency to the Singapore government. 4 days before his execution, in an interview with criminologist Christopher Barry D., John described in detail how he murdered Gerard Lowe and then dismembered his body. Christopher asked him, "So let's get this right, John. You slammed this innocent man against the wall of the room, then beat him half senseless. Then you drag him into the bathroom, lift him into the bath, forcing his head down to his knees. You turn on the taps, and cut through the back of his neck to paralyze him. Then you stab him in the neck or whatever and let him bleed to death. Did you know what was going on by then?" John snarkingly replied, "Yes, he pissed and shit himself. It made a stink. He was shitting himself. It wasn't good and I threw up. He really shit himself, but he couldn't do much about it, could he?" Good Lord, bruh. After John said that he dismembered Gerard's body to make disposal easier, Christopher asked, "Is it true that you used a little saw that went with your Swiss Army knife?" John responded with, "That's bollocks. I have a knife like that for camping. Anyone will tell you that you can't use a little saw like that for cutting carcasses." When asked what he used, he said, "A 6-inch boning knife. Well, after the blood had been washed away, I took his head off. Just like a pig. It's almost the same. You cut through the throat and twist a knife through the back of the neck. There ain't much mess if you do it properly. I cut off his arms at the elbows. You just cut through the ball and socket joints. You don't saw anything. I just stuck the knife in and twisted and cut till the legs came away at the hip joint, I suppose. When I got to the knees, I just cut through and they snapped back so I can fold them." Still extremely delusional, he ended with this, "They won't hang me. I'm British." On April 19th, 1996, after our last meal of pizza and hot chocolate, John was laughing and joking with the guards, uttering the last words, "Karma is karma. It's in God's hands now." He was hanged in the Changi prison alongside heroin traffickers Richard Lau Gi Boon and Lee Mang Hung. On that day, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Royal Thai Police closed their files on the murders of Sheila and Darren DeMude, declaring the case solved. At the time of his death, John became the first Brit to be executed in Singapore since the nation's independence from British rule in 1959. He was also one of the first Europeans to receive the death penalty in Singapore. John is believed to have killed more than 3 people, as Scotland Yard suspected him of having killed 2 men from South London, financial advisor Timothy McDowell and accountant William Shackle. In Mexico, John had told Maria about going scuba diving with Timothy, who was taking lessons while on holiday in Belize. Timothy disappeared in early 1995, but police couldn't conclusively match him to an arm and 2 legs that are found near the water. The only suspicious activity they uncovered was a transfer of £21,000 from his bank account to an account in San Francisco under John's name. Timothy is believed to have been murdered as he slept, with his remains thrown into a crocodile-infested river. John refused interviews from Scotland Yard while on death row, so McDowell's murder remains unsolved. Shackle was reported missing while on holiday in Cancun. Police said that John was in Cancun on the day William cashed traveler's checks worth $4,000, after which he disappeared. John was also wanted in San Francisco for the murder of male prostitute Tom Wenger on March 28, 1994. Tom's body was dismembered and drained of blood, being found wrapped in plastic bags in a dumpster in Myrtle Alley. John's photo matched a composite sketch of a suspect made by San Francisco police. However, he was eliminated as a suspect as it was determined that he was living in a British halfway house at the time of the murder. Man, thank you guys for watching. This was a story with many twists and turns. Just, "They won't hang me, I'm British." Like just the gall to say something like that. And you're like, "Oh, no. I didn't dismember his body with a saw. I used a boning knife." Like, what? The tourist from hell. Definitely. Leave a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Turn on my post notifications if you haven't already. Thanks. I'm out. Peace.
Excuse me.
Was he a very good man? Do you think it would be possible that he could have dissected a human corpse?
Excuse me.
Can you say
What
a
a
few words?
distinction between deboning and what you said.
There's linkage between what he had, what sort of evidence he had on him when he arrived here, with the people that were found murdered later on in Phuket, Thailand.
Have a microphone back, please.
Mr. Scripps, are you confident your son will get a fair trial in Singapore?